I think it's important to put all this in some context. It really harkens back to the end of the large-scale global socialism. When you look at what the developed world was, or the capitalistic world was, prior to 25 years ago or so, it was about 800 million people in Japan, Canada, Western Europe, United States. You added about 3.5 billion additional people, creating this condition of massive oversupply of labor, of productive capacity, and of capital.
I think that we need to start thinking of global unemployment really more as a sort of an epidemic, because of the multiple social costs, environmental costs, political costs that it bears. What we don't know so much is that there is this kind of negative effect also on children of the unemployed. There are permanent effects on the loss of social networks, on the loss of social capital, on life satisfaction. I mean, you name it. Literally every socioeconomic problem you can think of is related in one way or another to unemployment.
We have continued to rely, and understandably so, on the normal meme that we've sort of adopted back in the late 70s, which is that government really doesn't have any role to play in the economy. And it's a question of making things attractive enough to the private sector to invest, create new plants, new jobs, new equipment, etc. The problem is that doesn't work because we have this massive exogenous source of labor that is considerably cheaper. The net of it is you have to then reconsider government's role. You have to actually look at the collective agent in a different way, and you have to say, okay, how are we going to take this excess capital? And it's hard to deny when people are throwing money at the developed countries at even negative interest rates that there is not a glut of excess capital in this world. How can you take that capital and actually put it to legitimate, productive, growth-producing use? The only way to do that is through infrastructure. I'm talking about massive infrastructure rebuilding in the United States and in many parts of Europe.
As an emergency tool, considering that we have the needs and we've got the people, we can certainly marry those objectives together. But infrastructure is not the solution, the long-term solution, I feel, to the cyclical unemployment problem that we observe basically around the world. There's got to be some other kind of targeted employment mechanism that will absorb people in downturns and recessions and release them into the private sector as the private sector recovers.
The world, adopted two sets of things late last year. One was the climate agreements, the other was the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN laid out. If we just took those as, rough frameworks for what needs to get done and put those kinds of investments to work, there would be a huge beneficial spillover for all kinds of other actors, private actors and countries. There's no shortage of demand for basic needs around the world. There's a few system obstacles that have to be overcome, obviously, but there is a chance to really unleash a whole new wave of global growth by focusing on the basic needs of many billions of people that are entering the global economy.
When I look at my children, I don't think about fiscal austerity as a means of saving their future. I think there's both assets and liabilities on the balance sheet that we pass to the next generation. I think we need a new story, because the story that we have has failed. A Chinese gentleman who I know quite well in his 80s has said to me, there's an old adage in China. People do not engage in revolt or in unrest because of their own circumstance in the moment. They engage in unrest when their children do not have a hopeful future. I think it's worth all of our time and energy and courage to head off that outcome to make sure that's not what we hand to our children.